All right, today we're going to speak a little bit about something that maybe most lay Catholics don't have a lot of familiarity with. Some, of course, do. Canon law. You might think, well, it sounds very dry and boring. And some parts of it are, to be sure. But in another sense, there's a lot of richness, really, to the canon law. Cardinal Burke, a few weeks ago, who, of course, is the prefect of the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura. Okay, he's the big judge. He's like the Supreme Court all wrapped up into one person. He's the head, the Chief Justice, you might say, of the Roman Rota. He had an excellent talk about kind of the spirituality of canon law. It's very interesting that since we're Catholics, of course, we are part of the mystical body of Christ, and so we're not just individuals out there all by ourselves kind of making it up. And so, of course, as you know, as soon as you get two people together, you're going to have differences of opinion. And so you need law or a custom, tradition to regulate. So in a way, it's just kind of just good manners. You know, if we want to have good manners as a Catholic, we need to know about canon law because that's what law is in the deepest sense. There's a Greek word is the same. Nomos means law and custom in Greek. So I forget who it was. I think it was Confucius, but I'm not sure. Said, only barbarians need law. By which he meant, if you really just practiced a traditional custom, you wouldn't need law, which is true in a certain way. But at any rate, he was making a philosophical point. So, all right. So we want to talk a little bit about the canon law. This came out of, why did I pick this topic? Because out of the last two apostolic letters that we read, we were talking about the definitions, first of the Immaculate Conception, 1854, and then the dogma of the Assumption in 1950. So, I don't know, do we have a couple extra bulletins over there that have the readings if you want them? Sorry. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So there's some extra ones just in case you didn't have them. So out of those two talks we had about those dogmas, some kind of questions kind of came up, but also the question was in the air, how does this become dogma and what's the difference? And so I thought this would be interesting because this is something that there's a lot of, I think, obscurity in Catholics' minds. I think it's easy to fall into if the Pope defines it infallibly, then that's what we have to believe. And then everything else is kind of misty. And so we want to try to bring some clarity to that situation. So let's just look. So basically, I can tell you very simply, there are three tiers of Catholic doctrine. Three tiers, three grades. You know, the top, the middle, and the bottom. Okay, so three grades of Catholic doctrine, you can say. And this is very Roman and very, if you asked an Eastern Catholic what about this, he would just say, I don't know, whatever it says in the liturgy, that's what we believe, and go about their business. It's a bit of a simplification. But this is a very Roman. We're going to define things and put them in categories. Okay, so the top one is the one you're familiar with. That's Canon 750. A person, by which they mean a baptized Catholic, must believe, so a baptized Catholic must believe with divine and Catholic faith all those things contained in the Word of God, written or handed on, tradition, that is, in the one deposit of faith entrusted to the Church, and at the same time proposed as divinely revealed, either by the solemn magisterium of the Church or by its ordinary and universal magisterium, which is manifested by the common adherence of the Christian faithful under leadership of the sacred magisterium. Therefore, all are bound to avoid any doctrines whatsoever contrary to them. Okay, that gets a little complicated there. There's a lot there. We're going to go through that a bit together. Manifested by the common... I just read that phrase for the first time right now. Manifested by the common adherence of the Christian faithful. That's what they call the sensus fidelium. We'll talk about that in a little bit. What's the source of this? First of all, this is almost word for word what the 1917 Code of Canon Law had. So, not to give you a whole discourse on canon law, but basically in the West, it's complicated, but there were just huge libraries of books, and that was the law. And so to be a lawyer really meant something. You really had to know all those different books. So long story short, it's called the Pio Benedictine Code. St. Pius X began it, and then it was finished by Benedict the 14th, 15th, I forget. At any rate, so that code was promulgated. The first time you had in one volume the law of the Catholic Church was 1917. It was the first time. Before that, it was this Roman common law tradition, and it would fill libraries. So again, to be a lawyer really meant something. Now, it still means something, but you have the one book, so it's a bit, that was a huge project, and it was somewhat successful, at any rate. And then we had, of course, the revision of that Code of Canon Law in 1983, and that also was somewhat successful. We'll talk about that more. So that's the first tier. The first thing we notice there in that Canon 750 is that something's divinely revealed, but we don't necessarily have the mode of the way it's promulgated. Either it could be ordinary or universal magisterium, or it can be a solemn declaration. Now that's tricky. This is going to be... Okay, so first let me just present them, and then we'll go through a bit more for each one, I think, would be the way to do it. So, yes, the Holy Father is going to do a better job, I think, of explaining that. So if it's divinely revealed, that's the top, number one, tier one. And we'll go through that more in a bit. Tier two, the second canon there, or first canon, paragraph 2. Everything which is proposed definitively by the magisterium concerning doctrine of faith and morals, that also is to be firmly embraced and retained. Therefore, if you reject these propositions, if you do, you are opposed to the doctrine of the Catholic Church, obviously. What does that mean? That just means then formal heresy is someone who denies anything in Canon 750. Okay, that's what that means. So any of those things. And we talked a little bit that last two talks ago, we got a little bit bogged down between the distinction between formal and material heresy. Remember, material heresy is just something that's not true about something regarding the deposit of divine faith. But formal heresy is when you obstinately deny it or obstinately doubt it, and that's what's spelled out in Canon 751. Formal heresy is the obstinate denial or obstinate doubt after the reception of baptism of a truth which is to be believed by divine and Catholic faith. Okay, obviously it's a definition of heresy. So anything that falls in 750, Canon 750, paragraph 1 or 2, after your baptism, and we're going to talk more. Right now we're just speaking abstractly. We're going to give concrete examples in a moment, okay? After your baptism, if you just don't know, so if you've been going to Catholic education in most of the schools around here for the last 30 years, okay, if you just happen not to know what your faith you're supposed to believe, okay, by no fault of your own, you're not a formal heretic, okay? You're a material heretic. But you're not obstinately doubting or obstinately denying the truth of the faith. You just maybe were never taught it, okay? And that's a sad case. But then that means you're not a formal heretic. You can't be punished with excommunication just because you weren't taught your catechism, okay? That's important to remember. That's a definition of heresy. Apostasy is if you go the whole 9 yards. Apostasy is the total repudiation of the Christian faith. Again, that has to be made not just in your mind. To be accepted by the church, you have to make a formal act of, called a defection. You have to make a formal act of defection from the Catholic Church. You have to show up at the bishop's office basically and say, I am no longer a Catholic. It's kind of a big thing. Anyway, that's to become a formal apostate, an apostate. A schismatic, or they don't refer to as a person, the next thing, a schism. Schism is the refusal of submission to the Supreme Pontiff. And it doesn't really spell out submission in what. Or of refusing communion with the members of the church subject to him. Interesting. Schism, refusing obedience to the Holy Father or refusing to be in communion with the members of the church who are in communion with him. That's very important, schism. Both of these, everything we've said so far has come almost word for word from that 1917 code, even though the quotations I'm giving you here are from the modern code that's now in effect, 1983, okay? So I think it's important to emphasize the continuity, of course, as the Holy Father would say, this hermeneutic of continuity. So this was not invented in 1983, okay? This goes back to 1917, and that itself was not just invented. Most of that code is taken from various canonical sources, the Corpus Canonicis.
I have a question concerning this. After Vatican I, it was my understanding that schism then became heresy for the infallibility of the Pope, or submission. That is not correct.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean, but if you meant that after Vatican I, which declared that the Holy Father is able to speak infallibly in certain ways, if you denied that, then you became a formal heretic because you denied a truth that was proclaimed by the Catholic Church to be divinely revealed. And then, as so often happens, heresy always leads to schism, and schism always leads to heresy. It's a two-way street, you could say. So then, after that, they broke away, and then they formed whatever, the Old Catholics, the Polish National Catholics, or whatever it is, different groups. So then those formal heretics became also schismatics. Does that make sense? Okay. Good. And we'll have more concrete examples, and this is the point. We'll try to do the abstracts, and then we'll try to piece it out a bit. Yes. Yes, schism always leads to heresy, and heresy is going to be a schism. So that's just kind of a principle of these things. And now we have a new paragraph, Canon 752, and this is really the hard one. This is where all the fight. The other two, as we'll see, actually, they might say, well, those are difficult. It becomes really clear because the church will tell you if it's in Category 1 or Category 2. Category 3 is difficult, and that's where the murkiness comes. This canon does not have an antecedent in the 1917 code, okay, Canon 752. This is, it's almost a word-for-word quotation from Lumen Gentium, one of the 4 dogmatic constitutions of Vatican II, okay, Lumen Gentium, on the church in the world. Paragraph 25, if you're interested. It's almost a word-for-word quotation. This is what it says. This is expanding. So we're talking about the development of Christian doctrine. This is too why I wanted to talk about this a bit. The last 2 classes we've talked a little bit about how is it that Christian doctrine develops and grows organically while still staying the same. Here we see, I would say this Canon 752, you could say, this is an organic outgrowth of Vatican I. Vatican I defines papal infallibility in kind of a medium way or a medium narrow way, okay? Not to get into that whole dogma, but there were groups on both sides. You know, the Ultramontanists were one of the very much harder and stronger definition of infallibility, Vatican I. And then those who said we shouldn't define it because either we didn't believe it, or that there was people who said we shouldn't define it even though we believe it's true, but it would be imprudent at this time to alienate the Eastern churches, whatever. So Vatican I, it was a very kind of a middle statement. So just about 100 years then after Vatican I, we have Vatican II, and then that's of course in the 65. I forget when Lumen Gentium is promulgated, so in between 62 and 65 there. I forget the exact date. But then, remember when John Paul II said he wanted the Code of Canon Law to be revised in light of Vatican II, okay? So the 1983 Code of Canon Law took him a while to do it, of course. They should have taken a little bit longer, but that's okay. At any rate, so that gets promulgated. So this is a reflection of, I would say, some mature reflection, 100 years more now, thinking about infallibility. We have a new canon. Let's look at it. Although not the assent of faith, okay, so not category 1 or 2, this is not part of your divine faith, a religious submission of the intellect and the will must be given to a doctrine which the Supreme Pontiff or the College of Bishops declares concerning faith or morals when they exercise the authentic magisterium, even if they do not intend thereby to proclaim it by a definitive act. Therefore, the Christian faithful are to take care to avoid those things which do not agree with it. Okay. That's tricky, right? That's tricky because it's so broad. It's so broad. We don't know what kind of truths, what kind of propositions fall into that category. I have a conservative commentary. It's published on the Code of Canon Law, published by Midwest Theological Forum, and that's kind of a middle of the road to leftists. No, I wouldn't say that. It's a conservative. That's a conservative publishing house, Midwest Theological Forum. Their code, their commentary is basically published by priests of everybody, but really Opus Dei, which is this conservative order. Their commentary on this code, on this canon, says most things of the Second Vatican Council would fall into this tier 3, just for example. So we can see this is going to be it's a gray area. What kind of obedience do we have to give to this? Is it tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3? Well, it's tier 3, but what does that mean? Well, we have to see. It's difficult. There are we'll look at it a little bit more in a minute. Okay, so those are the 3 grades. Divinely revealed, proposed to you definitively to believe, and if you deny either of those, you're a heretic, okay? And then we have this third tricky category to which it doesn't really have a name, but we'll just say those truths to which you must give religious submission of intellect and will. And that's kind of a catch-all category, ordinary magisterium. All right, so there's 3 different grades. That's the abstract, okay? So that's in 1983. And let me just go through a little bit and we'll catch up at the end. So in 1998, so 15 years later, the Holy Father is looking at, John Paul II, is looking at the ways by which people who are supposed to be authentically teaching the Catholic faith at a university or a seminary, for example, they have to make what's known as the mandatum, thank you. To make a mandatum, right? They have to make their oath that they will abide by the things that the Catholic Church teaches. And we needed a new one because it wasn't, we didn't have all of these 3 grades clearly defined. So the Holy Father, John Paul II, in 1998, issued a document, and that's that second one, Apostolic Letter ad tuendam fidem. And again, you could, it was there if you wanted. And he basically just tells you what I just told you, okay, in his document, making it clear that if you are going to have the mandatum to teach at a Catholic institution of higher education, or even lower education, if you have a mandatum, you have to believe clearly each one of these things, and it spells it out for you. And if you don't, well, it's going to be troubles. At the same time, the very same date, 28 May 1998, then Cardinal Ratzinger issued his accompanying commentary. Again, this is a standard practice, right? The official document is very terse and kind of just nuts and bolts. And then the explanatory commentary is going to flesh it out some more. And he, of course, had the competence as the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to issue such a document, and he did. Now, he's going to use a little bit different language, so you might think, well, this is just going over the same material, but I think it sheds light. It helps us to understand. So let's just go over it again. He's going to go over it again, the 3 grades of doctrine, divinely revealed, the first one, but uses a little bit different language. Okay, so what is this first tier? These doctrines are contained in the Word of God, the Holy Scriptures, written or handed down, defined with a solemn judgment as divinely revealed truths, either by the Roman Pontiff when he speaks ex cathedra, or by the College of Bishops gathered in council, or infallibly proposed for belief by the ordinary and universal magisterium. Now, who's the bright student in the classroom who spies what phrase he left out? From Canon 750, he left out that very problematic phrase, or which is manifested by the common adherence of the Christian faithful. Okay, so I'm not necessarily throwing that under the bus. I'm just saying that's interesting that he left that out. So, at any rate, just I don't know what to say about that other than it's interesting. Okay. Point 2. These doctrines all require the assent of theological faith. So these are just synonyms. So these are different words he's using, but these are synonymous, or we should say, let's not say synonymous because that's not true. I would say canonically equivalent phrases, okay? So the assent of theological faith, divine and Catholic faith. These are synonyms for these intents and purposes. All of these doctrines we've just mentioned require the assent of theological faith by all members of the faithful. And if you don't, you are a heretic. Okay. Examples. Good. Let's get concrete. And this is the nice part about this, about Benedict XVI, Cardinal Ratzinger's document. He gives you very concrete examples. So he gives you the examples. What are they? All the articles of the creeds. Okay. Now I have some concrete examples. So divine and Catholic faith. We have to believe all the articles in the creeds. What else? The great Christological dogmas. Those would be the great dogmas of the first 8 ecumenical councils. That there are 3 persons in the Blessed Trinity. That Christ is one divine person, yet having 2 divine natures, hypostatically united, with a human will as well as a divine will. Okay, those are the great Christological dogmas. Okay, that he was incarnate of the Virgin Mary, etc. The great Marian dogmas, well, we just spent some time talking. There are 4 great Marian dogmas, right? The perpetual virginity, the virgin birth, the Immaculate Conception, and the Assumption of Our Lady, right? Okay. The 4 great Marian dogmas. That she's the Mother of God is the first one. Sorry, 431. That she's the true Mother of God. That's the first Marian dogma. Okay. So that's tier 1. That should be clear to us, right? That's the clearest part of the presentation. Okay. Then the definitively proposed, this will be interesting because we'll get to use some of the examples that we've seen in the last 2 weeks. So any questions about that first tier? I think that's the clearest. Let's look to see what he says about this definitively proposed business. The object taught by this formula, so second tier now, includes all those teachings belonging to the dogmatic or moral area which are necessary for faithfully keeping and expounding the deposit of faith, even if they have not been proposed by the magisterium of the Church as formally revealed. That's very important. Okay. Why is it important? Because there's no distinction in the grade of our faith or in the grade of our moral certainty in that doctrine, except that it simply hasn't been proposed. The Church has said, I will give it to you definitively to believe, but I'm not saying it's divinely revealed. Let's look at an example. This is very interesting. He gives examples. What are some of these examples? These doctrines could be defined solemnly by the Roman Pontiff when he speaks ex cathedra. So how does that work? He could define it solemnly, but he wouldn't say it was divinely revealed. Now, this second category reveals to things that are, let's see. We'll read his footnote. It's better than my stumbling. So we'll just go through. Okay. So second tier could still be when he speaks ex cathedra, even taught infallibly by the ordinary and universal magisterium. And we have to give our assent, etc., etc., etc. Let's look at an example of this. What would be an example of this? How about let's consider the development of papal infallibility. So it was held as true, and then it was held to be definitive, and then it was declared to be divinely revealed at Vatican I. Okay, so that's an interesting progress there, the development of the doctrine. It was held as true, so you might say at some point it was third tier or something. It was just proposed by the majority of the bishops in union with the Pope that this was something to be believed. But it hadn't been defined yet. Okay? Then it was held to be definitive. So at some point, I don't have a date on that, but it was held to be a definitive teaching. The faithful, you have to believe this. But then, of course, lest there be any doubt, we at Vatican I, the Pope, declared it to be divinely revealed. Okay, so why did I give this example? Because this is something going into tier 1, because I wanted to give you a relief, something to show an opposite. So that example I just gave of papal infallibility is an example of something being bumped up to tier 1. Okay, it was declared to be divinely revealed. let's look at a different one, and I'll get back to the footnote. Let's go to example B. How about the reservation of priestly ordination to men? Dun, dun, dun. Hot topic, right? Okay, always held as true. Then it was held to be definitive. It was proposed as definitive. And then what happened? Apostolic letter of John Paul II, Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. He reaffirmed it definitively. He reaffirmed this doctrine as definitely to be held. And what does he say in that apostolic letter? Remember, apostolic letter is a form that can be used for many things. The declaration of the dogma of the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption of Our Lady, the form of that letter was an apostolic letter. Okay? So John Paul II also uses an apostolic letter, and he says what? The declaration of confirmation or reaffirmation by the Roman Pontiff, in this case, that sacerdotal ordination is reserved to men, is not a new dogmatic definition, but is a formal attestation of a truth already possessed and infallibly transmitted by the Church. Excuse me. Okay. See how that's important? That it's a tier 2? That he doesn't make a new dogmatic definition. He's not saying this is something divinely revealed, but rather he's saying this is my formal attestation of this truth which was already possessed and infallibly transmitted by the Church. Okay.
Did he do that largely because it was being challenged at that time? I mean, was this a response to something that was going on probably?
Yes. Exactly. You got it. And yes, exactly. The Holy Father continues with some more examples of these tier 2 truths. The illicitness of euthanasia, prostitution, fornication. What's the link there? These are moral truths. That's be hard-pressed to find. Some of the concepts didn't exist. All those concepts existed. Okay, you could think of other ones, okay, that maybe like stem cell research or something. Okay, that's a concept that doesn't exist in the Fathers, okay? But by meditating on euthanasia and these are moral things against life, you could say in the end. At any rate, so you wouldn't say that if you looked in the deposit of faith in the Holy Scripture or in the Church Fathers, could you say that it was divinely revealed that euthanasia is immoral? Well, I don't know. But we know for sure that it's definitively proposed as being immoral. And so we don't have to say, Christ himself revealed this to the apostles. He taught them about euthanasia and stem cell research and contraception. We don't have to say that, okay? So you don't have to say it's part of the creed. But it's still in that tier 2, which still demands your Catholic faith, which is everything. So you could put in there, it doesn't, interestingly, you could have put in there Paul VI, Humanae Vitae. You could have put Humanae Vitae in there, which a lot of example C is. You could have put the whole... It's okay. It's okay. You could have put all of Humanae Vitae in there. Things that are definitively proposed to the faithful. Okay. What are some other tier 2 truths, again, that you want to say every Catholic must believe, but you don't want to say have been divinely revealed? Historical truths, what are called in the theological literature dogmatic facts. As a seminarian, I was fascinated by that, a dogmatic fact. For example, the legitimacy of a papal election. Okay, so let's say you see the white smoke and they say, Joseph Ratzinger is now Benedict XVI. Yay! Now what if you want to say, well, how do I know that's true? I don't know that's true. Maybe I wasn't there, I didn't count the votes. I'm going to doubt that. Well, you can't. Because why? So the Church has to say, well, certain things we're going to declare to be dogmatic facts. There was an election. This man won. He is now the Pope. You have to believe that or you're not a Catholic. You're a heretic. Okay? How about the celebration of the Ecumenical Council? Vatican I met. It closed. It defined this. You can't doubt that. Vatican II was an ecumenical council. Don't throw anything. I'm hiding. Okay. All right? It was an ecumenical council. It met from 62 to 65. If you say it didn't or it wasn't, you're a heretic. We have lots of those around. Okay? You're a heretic. So you can't say that. Why? Because it's a dogmatic fact that there was one. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Canonization of saints. Now this means to be, canonized as a saint. This doesn't apply to beati, just so you would know. This is for the canonization of saints, qua saints, okay? So if you want to say, well, I don't like Pius X because, I don't know, you don't like him. Well, sorry. The church says he is a saint, canonized as a saint. It's Saint Pius X. So you can't say, well, I doubt that. I don't know about his holiness of life. He took snuff. You have to say, well, sorry about your luck. He is a saint, and if you don't want to believe that, that's fine. There's a nice little line over here called heretics. You can get in that one. Okay. It's a dogmatic fact. Okay. It's a dogmatic fact. So you can see already, I think, why do you want to do this? If the church only had tier 1 and tier 3, what's the problem there? So even kind of prescinding from theological considerations, just on the practical level, if the church had only tier 1, Articles of the Creed, and then tier 3, kind of murky, just obey me and give your religious assent, then there'd be a problem. Would be anytime you really wanted people to do something, you would be forced into the corner of what? Saying anything you wanted people to do, you have to say, this has been divinely revealed. And that is going to fall through, right? People are going to say to you, wait a minute, you're telling me God said to you that married people shouldn't use contraception? That's a little hard to believe. I don't believe that was divinely revealed to you. And that's why we have this second category. We're not, as Catholics, I think we often get into that. That's easy for us to think, well, it's got to be divinely revealed. It was infallible. It was ex cathedra. And everything else is kind of, well, no. But it's not, you see. So we have 3 tiers. We have those things of the creeds and the dogmatic definitions that we talked about. That's easy. But then we have the second one, where this is the play for, as St. Anselm said, right, fidens quaerens intellectum, the faith-seeking understanding. In this second tier, you can clearly see truths that have been the fruit of long centuries and millennia of thought. And, for example, these teachings on life, for example. Priestly ordination reserved to men. Priestly ordination reserved to men. That's a question that didn't come up for centuries, millennia probably, right? Didn't come up. But now that it comes up, if people want to say, well, you can't show me a document where St. Cyprian is going to be speaking about that issue. So don't tell me you have something to deposit of faith about it. We're not pushed into that position as Catholics. We don't have to say it was divinely revealed, it's of divino apostolic origin. Don't have to say that. We can say it was contained in the deposit of faith, but in a way that we didn't see clearly yet. It's something that faith can work on and get to a place of understanding where now it does see it. And it can be proposed to us to believe as Catholics definitively, yet not saying that God himself had to write the document for you. Let's go back up a little bit then to footnote 17, which is, it's example 3, but it says footnote 17. It's labeled point 2 in my edition here. This was a footnote 17 in Cardinal Ratzinger's document. This is very interesting. It should be noted, so definitively proposed. Point 3 is examples. A, development of papal infallibility. And we're in point 2, footnote 17. It should be noted that the infallible teaching of the ordinary and universal magisterium is not only set forth with an explicit declaration of a doctrine to be believed or held definitively. Okay. So let's just pause there for a minute. Okay. So just because something is infallible, when we hear the word infallible, I think oftentimes we think something that the Pope defined ex cathedra in a very clear document. That is one way of proclaiming something infallibly. But that's not the only way. And in fact, that's a very special way in terms of percentages or whatever. That's a very special, rare way. There's a more common way. And he talks about that. But infallible teaching, continuing line 3, infallible teaching is also expressed by a doctrine implicitly contained in the practice of the Church's faith. Okay, that would be like if you had a Mass from the 4th century, or that we saw, well, we had a Mass from the 8th century in which is the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin. So it's there, but not in a defined way. It's there implicitly, in a monument, we would say, a monument of tradition. Okay? So it's contained implicitly in the Church's faith, in the practice of the faith, or it's derived from revelation, Okay, something derived from revelation. Again, that would be the intellect, the reason, meditating on truths that we know to be divinely revealed, and then we reflect on them, we develop them, and we come to something that's derived from revelation. Or, in any case, something that would be necessary for eternal salvation, attested to by the uninterrupted tradition. All of those things that he just mentioned are things which would not necessarily be solemnly declared ex cathedra in a nice, clear apostolic letter. This infallible teaching is thus objectively set forth by the whole episcopal body. So all the bishops together, episcopal, not Anglicans, wine and cheese. Okay, set forth by the whole episcopal body. Ooh, now we get really kind of daring here. Now, by a whole episcopal body, we of course mean understood in a diachronic and not necessarily synchronic sense. Okay, that means he's speaking of all the bishops together across time, across the ages, diachronos. Okay, all the bishops together across the millennia, not just the bishops, as if I can borrow a phrase from G.K. Chesterton, not just those bishops who happen to be walking about. Okay, the bishops who merely happen to be walking about would be the synchronic bishops. Okay, the bishops in this time right now. But take a great example, the most famous example. It's textbook. It's in every introduction to Theology 101, right? The great example would be the Arian heresy, right? Arius, 4th century, well, 3rd and then late 3rd, early 4th century, Arius. Most of the bishops were Arians. They were heretics, okay? And so if you had to apply this principle, what you would say? You would have to say, when they had the Ecumenical Council in First Nicaea, 325, you have to say, well, I'm not appealing to only these heretic bishops who happen to show up at this council, okay? I'm going to appeal to the bishops across time, the letters that we also have from the early church fathers. Okay, now this is a dangerous principle, of course, you can see. You could use this both ways, but I think it's well, the Holy Father has said it, but I think it's true. And he continues. Furthermore, and this is really important, why I put it in bold. Furthermore, the intention of this ordinary and universal magisterium to set forth a doctrine as definitive, this is very important, is not generally linked to technical formulations of particular solemnity. So that's what I was trying to say in my bumbling words. Okay. Let me try to think of a good example. The clear example that came to mind was this one about the priestly ordination being reserved to men. If you look in I'm just going to have to make a guess because I wouldn't know exactly, but I don't know if before the 18th century or 19th century, if you could find any document calling into question the fact that ordination is reserved to men. I don't know. I'm just going to kind of make a stab at that. So let's just, for the sake of the argument, let's just say 15 centuries, just for the sake of the argument. For those 15 centuries, from Christ to Trent, okay, you're not going to find a technical formulation of particular solemnity which tells you, and by the apostolic authority, you must believe that the priesthood is reserved to men. Okay, you're not going to find it because it wasn't something that was debated. And that's why he would say, therefore, it will be enough, it will be attested to by the uninterrupted tradition. That's what the Holy Father would say, because you would say, well, we don't see this practiced in any other way. And so that's our argument, as it were. We don't have to say, wait, I found this document from Pope Linus or something, and here it says that, is definitively defined. It's not the general way. So these technical formulations are really special ones. Okay. And now for the least satisfying part for me, probably for you too, is this non-definitive category, the last bit here. And he just says the same thing, and he doesn't give any examples. Rats. That's the disappointing part. So the third tier is all the teachings on faith and morals presented as true, or at least as sure, even if they have not been defined with a solemn judgment or proposed as definitive. if you have a proposition contrary to these, they could be qualified as erroneous or rash or dangerous, and therefore tutto docere non potest, safely to be taught, they are not able. Okay, sorry, they're not able to be safely taught. Okay. As examples, we shall give you no examples. As examples of doctrines belonging to the third paragraph, one could point in general to teachings set forth by the authentic ordinary magisterium in a non-definitive way, which requires degrees of adherence to differentiated according to the mind and the will manifested. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. It goes on. So that's the hard part. What does that mean? I think here's a clear one. Well, yeah. I don't know, clear. Well, it's clear. It's clear that, here we go. Here's a clear one. Well, no, not so clear. It's hard. It's hard, this third one. At any rate, well, the commentators, those eminent doctors, said that most of the things in Vatican II would fall into this third paragraph. Okay, judgments of the prudential order. There aren't any doctrinal, really, not much doctrinal. Well, there are no definitions. Okay, so there's no solemn definitions. So there's no tier 1 things, right, proposed to us in Vatican II. Okay, other tier 2 things that are proposed to us definitively. No, there are no definitive statements. So by definition, you could say, since there are, and those are very clear. When something's tier 1, extremely clear. When something's tier 2, extremely clear. They tell you in big, bright, bold letters. So they don't tell you that by process of elimination. All you're left with is tier 3, to which we have this religious assent of the intellect and the will. And this is hard. This is hard. So it is an example. You probably can all think of lots of them. It's hard. One right, I wouldn't say, well, I don't know. I think here's one that's a popular one. John Paul II in his Evangelium Vitae, it's encyclical, gives some thoughts of his on capital punishment, right? He gives some what he considers to be qualifications for, necessary antecedents, conditions for it, etc., and ends up saying, well, it should be very, very rare, if ever, practiced in modern societies. Okay. Now, he's writing an encyclical. He's not defining it as 1 or 2. So this is something that we have to give religious assent of the intellect and the will to. Okay, we don't want to combat it necessarily. And it's something I think the Florida bishops in the province of Miami, they've also signed, we want to repeal the death penalty. Okay, so these are things which are not proposed as definitive. So they may or may not be true. Okay? We don't know. It's hard. That's a hard one. I picked that one because that's one that I don't really agree with, so I have to think about it. But I don't go around giving rash sermons attacking it, right? Okay? I don't talk about it. I have to think about why is this being proposed to me to believe. Since I'm not a senator or a governor or anything, I don't have to sign any warrants for people to die, so it probably won't come up for me personally in the sense of exercise of my civic duty. But anyway, that's a hard one. So I'm kind of putting myself out there. For me personally, that's hard. I don't agree with it off the top of my head, but of course I also haven't really reflected on it sufficiently. So that'll be an example. But